People on the right? People on the left? All right. Good afternoon, everybody. We are getting started. The date is August 23rd, 2022, and the time is 4:33. To ensure we have a quorum present, I'm going to read out the names of members of the Executive Committee, and if you're here, please say present. Colin Clark, present. Dr. Lael Melville.
Present.
Thank you. Don Davidson. Cameron Johnson.
Present.
Thank you. Ed Toriak. Andre McEwen. John McPherson.
Present.
Thank you. James Canton. Here. Good. Michael Stack.
Present.
John Beckert. Pilar Davies.
Here.
Good. Christine Vandevelde. Is that who we have a quorum? Okay, thank you. I know that we do have a quorum of the Executive Committee present, and I call to order this Executive Committee of the Board of Uplift Education. Before we get into anything more, as this is the first meeting at which...
Trish is like someone laughing at you.
Richard, you're so wishing you were going to right? Not. As it is the first time...
keeping score over here.
He's going to find all the faults and say, yeah, I was better. I wanted to just say a couple of quick things because it is kind of the start of, first of all, a new year, and then Lael and I heading into these jobs. So I wanted to say a couple of quick remarks about some principles of board governance and what I personally hope for the operation of this board over the next couple of years. So first thing to say is this is the start of a new year at Uplift, and it's a good moment, first of all, just to say to everyone who serves on the board and gives their time to this effort, thank you very much. You could be doing a lot of other things with your time. This is obviously all of us believe noble, important work. Thank you for being a part of it. You make a lot of things possible in this organization. And I think also on behalf of the board, we can never say often enough to Yasmin, to all of our executive team, to all staff who are here, you all do really important and really challenging work, and we are grateful. So, next thing I want to say is a couple thoughts about principles of the board's role. I don't think you'll find it's very different than Richard or any past chair, but nonetheless there can be mild differences in style, and I just want to over-communicate rather than under-communicate. Couple principles. One is I personally believe, and I'll bet you all do too, that the role of the board, it can never be said often enough, is governance, not management. There can always be sometimes a tendency, I think, for a drift into management. Generally speaking, not a healthy thing. But at the same time, I think we also have to recognize that governance is in itself challenging and really important. And if there's one lesson I've personally learned from all kinds of, been fortunate to have a lot of governance experience and to see other situations, when governance is not good, give it time enough, things go bad. We must do this job well. We also need to recognize that a part of governance is external advocacy. Everybody here is a spokesperson for the organization, and we are a spokesperson in a context, a wider context in the world when Uplift needs all the advocacy that we can get because there's all kinds of messaging out there, and we need to all be strong external advocates with every opportunity we have. And then lastly, also governance brings with it financial responsibility. I know John can't be here today, but in the future, no doubt we will hear from him, and you'll hear from me, that financial support within reason of what you can do is a part of service on board. A couple principles about how I hope the board will operate. One is the following dichotomy, if you will. I think it's really important that we promote tough questions, dissenting opinions, lively conversation, behind closed doors together, and that we send out a unified message to the external world when we are not meeting in session. Hopefully that goes without saying, but it takes some doing in both cases. I think you could easily make a case that this is a very polite group, and maybe it needs to stretch a little bit to have those lively conversations. At the same time, it is really important that we have the same message when we go to the outside world. Another thing is that I would suggest, and we've been working hard on this, Lael and I, is that it's really important to get everyone on the same page. We are an organization in which all of us want to empower and support our committee chairs and our committees, and a whole lot of the work is done by the committees, and that has generally served us well. We can have moments, and I've seen this a little bit in my years involved, when maybe the right hand and the left hand don't always know 100% what they're doing. For that reason, Lael and I have initiated this process of meeting with each of our committee chairs once at the beginning of the year, along with Yasmin and some executive team members. We've done about almost half. There's more than half scheduled. There's a couple more still to schedule. Those have been really useful, and it's very much an effort to get everyone on the same page, figure out how we can help, and how make sure we know what the committees are doing and how does it relate to what the other committees are doing, because being on the same page is finally really important. Last thing I want to say is I very much hope, first of all, that we accomplish a couple things over this year. I hope that we build our knowledge of the organization in a very intentional way, that we strengthen our governance muscles. One thing we talked about a lot in our session with Dawn, who, for anyone who doesn't know, is the chair of our governance committee, is the importance of, we want to be as intentional as we can be about building everybody up in their knowledge of the organization. That might mean asking people, for example, to serve on a committee that might not be the most familiar subject for them in the future. And maybe Dawn will speak to this in a little bit. But the principle is, let's create people who know a lot about the organization and are ready to be in this or that leadership position and to be great external advocates. And the last thing is, I personally hope, I hope this goes without saying, but I hope that this service on the board is interesting. I hope it's inspiring. I hope it's something that everybody is proud and grateful to be a part of. That you will look back and say this was the best board experience you ever had, the most rewarding board experience, as it has been for me. So on that note, that's what I had to say, and we will roll into our agenda.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think it's going to go to Alex for our community forum.
Yeah, thank you. We had a community speaker signed up. The community speaker I emailed with a couple of times. I do not see the individual here. I know we have checked outside, so at this time we can go ahead and move past community forum on the next agenda item.
Okay. All right. Let's see.
We are approving minutes.
Right. Here we go. Okay, our next order of business is to consider and take action on the June 21st, 2022 board meeting minutes, which were provided to you all in the pre-read material. Are there any questions from the board on the proposed minutes? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the board minutes from June 21st, 2022 as presented?
I so move.
Thank you. Is there a second?
A second.
Any votes against the motion? Hearing none, the motion is approved by unanimous vote. I'll next hand it to Yasmin for our mission moment.
Great.
Yasmin, take it
It's
away.
moments. We're going to do two. So we've kicked off the school year, and we thought we'd take 2 minutes and take you into our Uplift schools so you can see the intentionality of making sure kids dove into learning, but also had joy and an ability to build a deep sense of belonging, which is one of our goals for this year. So with that, we are going to kick off just a very short video. As you can see, we're trying to be really intentional about taking the first week and doing team building, building relationships among kids and with their teachers, obviously establishing routines and procedures, and Remy in her update will go into more detail about what the first few weeks have looked like, but we wanted to give you just a little glimpse. And so then with that, I'll transition to our second mission moment, and we are so grateful to Ricky for helping facilitate this very generous gift from the Charles Schwab Foundation. It was a couple of years in the making, but the Charles Schwab Foundation is giving Uplift $439,000 to go towards our Road to College and Career programs. All of our Uplift High School students will have an opportunity to participate in Schwab's MoneyWise America Financial Literacy Program, which is a really big deal for our kids as they go off into college and build their independent lives to have those strong financial literacy skills. 220 of our seniors from across all of our high schools are going to be on site when Charles Schwab opens up their new offices that were ready to open pre-pandemic, and then we're on a pause. So we're glad to be part of that exciting moment, and they'll actually participate as part of the new office activities in a career exploration trip. And then there's a really surprise moment planned for them, which we'll share after it happens, which is coming up in a few months, but it's just really neat. And so, Ricky, on behalf of our leadership team at Uplift, and I'm sure on behalf of the whole board, thank you for your stewardship of making
Just chime in there for a moment and say I did mention before that some degree of financial support is a responsibility of all the board, but to arrange this is absolutely fabulous. We're so very grateful. Thank you for all that you do. Happy to do it. Okay.
Awesome.
Next item, we'll hear from Yasmin for a finance and enrollment update.
Yeah, with Jim, but my slide is up next. I'm going to do a lot up front, and then I'm going to hand it off to the rest of the team. So actually, if you'll go, Carrie, to one more slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so I want to give you all an enrollment update. We talked about just a few numbers before. Remember, like the first day of school, we kept talking about how important it was that we over-enroll the network, right? Because we knew we'd see a drop the first day of school. We didn't know what that drop was going to look like. The drop mirrored last year, unfortunately. Historically, we see about a 5 to 10% drop pre-pandemic. Last year, we saw a 14% drop. That drop held again. So as you can see, literally the day before school started, we were at 25,000 children we expected to show up, and 3,000 didn't show up, right? It's the same thing as last year. And I understand that this is probably like pretty shocking for those of you who maybe your children are in private school and there you pay tuition so you're not getting it back, right? Or maybe you're in a suburban district where there's not as much mobility of families. But for us, we do have high mobility. And so we literally saw 3,000 kids that we thought were coming did not arrive the first day. That breakout is 70% returning kids who already had an experience with us, and 30% new students who had been drawn through the lottery. We are trying to get as much detailed information of when you say you decided to go to a different school, like why did you decide to go to a different school, right? But as you can imagine, it's kind of hard, right? Because these families didn't give us the heads up or didn't share with us in all of our touch points in advance, are you coming, confirm. So it's just makes it even harder when we're trying to go back and get feedback. So the first day of school, we were below budget. We were at 21,395, right? Because of that 14% drop. We then have added 1,800 students over then the course of a 2.5-week period. So as of just a few days ago, we were at 23,000, or we are at 23,199 scholars. Again, budget, which is what is the average number of kids we expect over the year, is 22,381. So we're over by 800, but that's just not enough. If attrition follows the patterns that we've seen over the course of the year, that will put us below budget by some amount. So we've now exhausted our wait list, and at this point, what we're looking to is, as our applications open for next school year, we're actually opening the application earlier than we normally do, is to start asking those families, hey, do you want to come now? We'd be happy to take you now if there's a spot in that specific school or grade level. So we've actively been sharing these numbers with our school leaders. Our school leaders literally get a daily report that shows them their average daily attendance by grade level, and they see withdrawals and adds as well for their specific school. We have a weekly leadership team call on Thursdays with all of our academic directors and deans and operations directors and members of the leadership team at the CMO. We said, okay guys, we've pretty much hit peak enrollment right now for this first kind of tranche. And so now, where we asked you the first 2 weeks to lean in, really welcome these families as they've joined Uplift, now we need you to pivot, and your focus needs to be on retaining those families, getting ahead of any issues that might cause a withdrawal that are in our control. Obviously, mobility issues are not, but we know there are things that we can control when it comes to withdrawals and attendance, right? Now it's time. Attendance can be just trickier to manage the first few weeks of school because you have scholars in and out. But now it's time to make sure those incentives you have and the communication plans you have in place are there. So this is basically where we stand. It was our worst case scenario that we would match last year. And now we are in a hold on to students game and a look to where we can do some early admissions as we launch the lottery process this fall for next year. So I'll pause there before Jim does his update just to see if there are any questions that folks have. Well, we're going to tell you what the revenue implication is on Jim's slide, but if you have any questions about this trend. Yes, Laura.
I don't know if this is ethical.
Yeah.
But has anyone thought of anything like, if you sign up first day of school, you're a new student, and you stay till the end of the year, you get a signing bonus kind of a deal. Because that's worth a lot of money.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know, just throwing it out there.
So we haven't done, that's a really interesting idea where it's like, what's the incentive? Like, do you get next year's uniform free or something like that, right? If you stay for a year. Instead, what we did is to try to, we had like a set of families that were just like stuck in the system where they hadn't completed all of their paperwork yet that they needed. And so we gave them incentives of like, if you finish in the next 2 weeks and complete your re-enrollment or your enrollment paperwork, we'll give you 2 free uniform shirts. So we did that, but it's an interesting idea of like, what do you get if you continue to show your investment in the network? So we'll take that idea back. As long as it's something that contributes to their educational purposes, we're allowed to do it. Like, we can't give kids Xboxes, but if it's something that we can have a direct tie to supporting the
I don't know, with,
education mission.
the scholastic,
Yes, exactly.
free books or
Yep.
whatever.
It's a good idea, Laura. Yep, it's a good idea.
Yasmin, do you have any feel for what other districts are experiencing?
I honestly don't right now. And Deborah, I don't know, have you heard anything from our charter peers?
I haven't heard anything. Just what I've read in the media is that I don't think this is a unique issue to Uplift, especially in more competitive markets. I think parents are just making different choices. And in the primary school, right, is where you're seeing a lot of gaps because the last couple of years, people didn't send their kids to pre-K or kindergarten. And now, so it's, I just think we still don't know enough.
Oh, and we track enrollment, across the U.S. and public school enrollment is down across the board, often a lot more than 14%. It's a rise in homeschooling, really, and really, really small pod-like sort of private schools are on the rise. So, and that is absolutely a direct correlation to what they did during COVID, and they just stuck with it.
And we've also seen an exit from like urban centers too, and our schools sit in urban centers, so this like free to like Mesquite, for example, right? Like, we don't have schools in Mesquite, and so we think that also population shifts could also be negatively impacting us. It's a little hard to see the local data right now at this moment because it was the oddest August we've ever seen. Like, every district had a different start date. And so it was like every week, oh, these 3 or 4 districts are starting this week, and then this set is, happening. But we'll continue to keep our eyes out for that data, and that's helpful context.
And we asked JLL to help us do some demographic analysis now that the new census is out, because one of the questions was with housing costs rising, right, are our families leaving where our schools are, to Yasmin's point, to more affordable areas, and we haven't quite answered that question yet. Is housing costs playing into it as well?
So I promise everyone's paying attention to these things. We talk about them a lot, and our leaders probably hear us talking about them more than they like us talking about it. But everybody understands the importance of it. Okay, we'll go back here if you don't mind. 2 slides, please.
So I usually start the presentation, finance presentation with 4 metrics: enrollment, attendance, liquidity, and expense. But this early in the year, we only really have visibility, decent visibility on enrollment and some visibility on attendance. Now, just so all the points on Yasmin's graphs are points in time, but when we try to forecast for the whole year, we have to, we get paid by the TEA for every seat filled on every day. So our model is you calculate an average attendance for a full, average enrollment for the full year, apply attendance to it, and then, you know, multiply it by 10,000, whatever, $10,000, $11,000. So what we try to do on that top graph, the average daily enrollment is, you know, our budget was 22,000, average enrollment was 22,871. Yasmin, the peak enrollment is 23,199. We have many years of historical data that we look at from what happens from peak attendance through the rest of the year. Once you have peak attendance, you add certain kids, but the unenrollments overpower the new enrollment. So from peak attendance down, from peak attendance on, you have a slight decline. And we can basically forecast that now. And we are comfortable saying we're going to end up with an average daily enrollment of about 22,400 to 22,700. And this results in a risk that we think we have due to enrollment only of $1.5 to $4.6 million at this time. You know, as we go on the next couple months, we'll get more visibility on our cost side, and you know, that's when we come back and see you in October and we ask for an amended budget. On attendance, our budget was 95%. The first couple weeks we're seeing 93.3. 93.3 is very similar to last year's number. You know, post-COVID it was down big time, and then we worked on it throughout the year to improve it. Pre-COVID numbers are a lot higher than 93.3. I mean, we were hitting attendance pre-COVID consistently year over year above 96 to 97%. And we thought we could get it back to 95 because we started to see some higher numbers in the second semester, but that's why, as Yasmin says, we're starting to work on it early this year, and we're already working with the class in the classroom. So the next page, if you don't have any questions on this page, I want to talk about this chart we showed when we did our budget. And the black is what we talked about in the budget. The blue are updates. And so first day of school, we already heard this, that you know, it's 14% no-show. That's above what we usually experience. We talked about, well, maybe we were going to get additional funding from the state on 2023. We are not, and we're highly confident that we are not going to get any increase in basic allotment at this time. It's the third year. We had a $1 increase over 3 years now on the basic allotment. Another question, we also needed to understand the CMP program. Geez, last night on the news it was all over, but universal free lunch program during the pandemic has ended. To offset that, though, we knew before, a couple weeks ago, a month or so ago, that our reimbursement rates were going to go up. We're still trying to measure out, and it's going to take some time. We're still going through enrollment of our lunch enrollments with people, so I'll come back to you in the next couple board meetings, and I can tell you if it's a plus or a minus, but you know, we did budget conservatively in this area. We talked about when do we see the major peak. You know, historically it usually occurs mid to late September. I think with our early start, I think we're seeing it this week. And finally, we talked about when we did this budget, and it's ever more important now, that ESSER funding ends soon. With these shortfalls, we're using up more ESSER, but it really puts an emphasis on advocacy for both us and other districts. And we think that a lot of us are going to be advocating for increasing basic allotment from the state. And, your participation in whatever way would be appreciated. That's all I have.
Any additional questions for Jim?
So we'll revisit the budget in October with more information.
Yes.
Okay.
I guess the only thing I would bring up before we move on is, as the chair of the advocacy committee, obviously there's things that this board cannot do here, but individually there's a whole lot going on. So we're mindful of this, Jim. So thank you, and we're looking forward to the next legislative session. I'll leave it there.
Okay. Anything else? Moving on then, our next item is to hear from Ann Erickson, Chief People Officer, for a hiring update. Ann, take it away.
Thanks, Colin. Hi, everybody. You can consider this the appetizer to what we will get into a lot more detail on when we're together at the September board retreat in regards to our human capital. But now that the school year is underway, I did want to share with you an update as to how hiring is progressing, particularly in our classroom-based positions, which you guys know, classroom teacher is where we keep our primary focus when thinking about hiring as well as retention. So what we've shared with you are the numbers, first and foremost by primary school, middle school, high school, and then aggregate. This is the deeper dive into what the numbers look like for our classroom-based positions, which we are defining as teacher, teacher assistants, and intervention specialists. We pulled this data last week. We are looking at it every day. We pull it on a weekly basis to be able to share out with the leadership team as well as on the weekly leader calls. So the top line here is that we, as of last Tuesday, have 144 openings across all of those positions out of 1,858 total classroom-based positions. That puts us at about a 7.5% vacancy rate. The good news is that is a lower vacancy rate than where we were at a year ago. We started the year at about 10%. We saw quite a bit of fluctuation in August and September. As you can recall, that was the beginning of the Great Resignation. And then we ended the first quarter last year at just under a 9% vacancy rate. So while that number is still high, it's trending more positively than where we sat a year ago. I'm going to come to the chart for just a second, and then I'll come back to my top line. So you can see the breakdown of the numbers, primary, middle, and high. The primary numbers are higher. We, of course, have about the same number of primary schools as middle and high combined, so that's just something to think about and looking at the difference in the numbers across division. But still wanted you to be able to see how this plays out by division, and then also the offers and process. That is how many people we have somewhere in onboarding, so they're somewhere between accepting a verbal offer and actually starting on their first day. And then what we've shared here in the projected number of hires is how many total classroom-based positions we anticipate hiring this 22-23 school year based on the hiring we've done to date, as well as the open positions that we have. That number is always fluctuating and changing because we get resignations and we get separations. And so for that reason, there is fluidity to it. And then the last thing I wanted to share with you was just what the acceptance rates are by division as well. Of all the people who have received an offer from us, what percentage of them have said yes and then matriculated into the role. So that's just a little bit of more color and context around the numbers themselves. I do want to just name that with all of these numbers, it's still just a fraction of the pie. We know that this is where we put most of our attention and focus. This is also where you guys have placed a stake in the ground in regards to just the emphasis on teacher retention and teacher hiring. We are hiring for a number of additional positions outside of classroom-based roles. We've hired in over 500 people since July 1. When you factor in the 308 classroom-based positions, as well as about 85 resident teachers and TFA core members, about 77 CMO and ops positions, and then we have about 70 people that are somewhere in the onboarding process right now. So that kind of paints the full picture for you while seeing specifically where we are with our classroom-based hiring. With the classroom-based hiring, what is unique to this is that when these positions are not filled, especially classroom teacher, we have to figure something out as far as ensuring coverage and continuity of instruction for the scholars that are in that classroom. And so we have pulled multiple levers to be able to ensure that in spite of having still a vacancy rate at about 7%, we have as close to 100% as possible coverage and consistency within each of those classrooms. We have long-term substitutes that we deploy as well as daily substitutes. We have some campus-based staff, including permanent subs that report every day to the campus. Their sole job is to be in a classroom and supporting wherever they are needed for that day. We've also gotten creative with how we're leveraging other support staff that doesn't have a full-time course that they're teaching, schedule that they're stuck to when looking at our TAs and our intervention specialists. So those are some of the things that we are doing to help manage where we sit right now with our vacancy rates. But I wanted to share that top line with you guys so you can see what we are looking at now that we are a couple of weeks into the school year and continuing to make progress with hiring.
Questions for Ian?
I got a question. And this may be a year too early, but with the ERISA funds that I think help promote the idea of intervention type people who took people out of the teaching workplace and put them into a consulting role or whatever, have we started to see any momentum for those wanting to come back?
It's a great question. You know, there's always been a ton of mobility in general from my perspective within the K-12 sector with people kind of trying out different districts, different places. I think you are right though that we're a little bit too early on to see the pendulum swing all the way back with people who have actually stepped out of a school-based position or a district-based position to take on something like a consultancy job or external opportunity where they're still supporting and working with districts but not employed by one. I will say that we've seen an uptick in the number of people who are reporting leaving to take a job that is doing something other than working for another charter or ISD. So I think that that's indicative of there just being more opportunity for people to go do that type of work. But I think it's a little bit too soon to tell or see the return of those people. That I think is a very real possibility over the next couple of years as things continue to change.
I just want to comment that on the news, the last several nights has been a shortage of teachers countrywide. So we're not just competing for local talent, it's everybody's competing for talent. So that makes it tough.
And Steve is looking at neighboring states and doing recruitment events there where might we have a compensation advantage versus a neighboring state because our per pupil student funding is higher. But you're right, it is a national issue.
It's also, people are leaving the profession, but also the number, our pipeline partners are feeling the pressure too of fewer people deciding to become a teacher right now. And so we're very excited about having 85 core members and residents. It's about just shy of 30 TFA core members and close to 50 resident teachers that we were able to hire in this year, which is a much higher number than what we had last year. But we pretty significantly increased the number of pipeline providers because everyone was feeling that pressure to recruit into their college of ed and just student teaching programs.
So I would say just like we are in very direct conversations with our school leaders around retaining families, we are also having those same conversations around retaining staff. Like have initial conversations early about what does your experience look like? Do you understand your expectations? Do you have the resources you need to be successful? So that way we can address any early frustrations that might potentially exist at the front of the year before it bubbles up and we have a potential exit situation on our hands. So right now it's retention is our key word.
Good questions. Thank you, Dan. Next, we will hear from Uplift's president, Dr. Remy Washington, about 2 items. Number 1, our TEA accountability ratings for the last school year. And number 2, the kickoff of this new school year that we're now in. Dr. Washington.
Sounds good. So I'll get us started with this school year. Sounds great, I just didn't know which word these were in. So I'm glad the slide advanced. It's been like a really fast start to the school year. I really just want to thank our teachers and leaders. As you've heard Ann and both Yasmin mention, they've got to focus on retaining every single soul in the building, but they've really focused in on making sure they were trying to really make the instructional environment both rigorous but also purposeful. So we started this year off with the Writing Revolution, it's the book that we leverage, to getting more students writing in our classrooms. And so we started our teacher professional development with low stakes writing. So it's been really great to see so many classrooms adopt this very quickly. And within the first week of school, just seeing teachers modeling what does good low stakes writing look like, and our scholars being invested in our writing initiative for this particular school year. If we'll go to the next slide. We talked about prioritizing the scholar experience, and so when Yasmin said, like, we need to make it really special for kids to want to come to school, I think this example of White Rock Hills, like literally rolling out the red carpet for our scholars on the first day, I think they do such a great job with their decor in that campus. But we're really intentional about what are all of our scholars going to see when they enter school, when they first come back to school. So I think we've done a better job across the continuum. Usually primary schools are great at creating like really good, joyous experiences, but I think our high schools give it their best shot at making the first couple of days of school special for all of our students. Going back to the instructional block, and so we have always had the Uplift 5, those 5 SEL practice, always, I say always. At the start of the pandemic, whenever that was, about 2.5 years ago, we really were purposeful about what do the SEL practices need to look like during the school day. And so this year, we tried to get really narrow on our focus and said, one of our practices that we don't do extremely well, but that could pay off dividends in terms of building our scholar stamina and making instruction enjoyable, was how do we increase movement for learning breaks during the school day? And so again, starting the school year off really fast. These are 2 examples just on one visit to Uplift Atlas, where teachers are really intentional about scholars continuing to learn, but also including movement in the instructional block. So really grateful for the leadership of John's team to get our teachers a bunch of strategies to do that, to improve the experience for our scholars. We saw a little bit in the video about the scholar team building experiences that scholars had. We are prioritizing the overall scholar experience when it comes to athletics and clubs. So our sports have kicked off in our secondary schools. You'll see our Uplift Summit high school varsity volleyball team already started off the season with a big tournament win. And then they had at Summit High School during their transition camp, we started the year off with most of our scholars entering grades kinder, 6th and 9th grade, and any new scholar coming onto campus pretty early before everyone else. And so this is one of the team building activities where they bumped around in those bubbles. And I'm sure whatever child is laying on the ground, I hope they're safe, Alex. And so just scholars starting the year off a little bit differently in terms of building relationships, not only with their teachers, but with one another. So I think, again, our schools did a great job doing this for the very first time of starting the school year off, where kids could enjoy school in a way in which they had never done so before. Really, really excited that this week is our Family Appreciation Week, and so our family engagement team, amongst many teams across the network, have just put together a number of different events throughout the week, and so we're celebrating our families this week. So it's, again, another way to just recognize our families. Like, they have many, many choices of schools to send their kids to, but we wanted to start the year off just thanking them for choosing Uplift and how they've supported their scholars throughout the summer, and will continue to do so throughout the year. And then the last thing I would say that's new for the start of the year, but not new, so as last year we had our community resource fair, which is really well attended and really well received by our families, where there were just an array of different vendors that our families could come to learn more about different topics, such as immigration, get financial literacy support, just an array of opportunities for them to just reach out to have actual touch points with different third-party vendors. Well, we did it in the spring, I believe, or late fall. I'm trying to think of what the weather was like. But we found that most school districts usually hold events like this toward the beginning of the year, so that families could have these resources like free school supplies at the start of the school year. So that is coming up September 10th to kick that off to support our families. And so we're really excited to be able to do that again this year and do it much, much, much earlier for our families. So we probably need to go up a slide or so, or back. Okay, I'm not sure.
Oh, I think, I'm so sorry, Carrie. I think the appendix for her accountability deck came after this, so we just have to transition to the next piece of her overall. Yeah, there you go.
Great, all right, now we're together. All right, so let's talk about my other second favorite topic is state accountability. At least it's felt like that for the last week and a half or so. We got our 2022 state accountability rating. We are a B. That is the same rating we got the last time that we got a rating in 2019. So it's been that long since we've had it. Any district has had a rating in Texas. We are 1 point lower in our overall score, and I'll talk a little bit about how that came to be. Domain 1 is where we earn our achievement points. So how well our students meet and master the content on the state STAR exam is where you get your domain 1 point. If you guys recall from the last board meeting, we had a lot of growth in higher levels of achievement and our reading scores across the board, but math, we didn't see that same level of achievement. So that difference in achievement from math is where you see that 1 point differential between our 2019 rating and our 2022 rating. Domain 2 is about how much your students grow. Obviously, our growth in reading was really, really rapid, and so we got a lot of points. Our reading growth is much higher in 2022 than it was in 2019, so kudos to the team for continuing to push up the literacy skills for our scholars. Our math growth actually remained the same, which is actually an improvement over 2018. So our students still grew in math. We just had further to grow in math. And so we just didn't see that play out on the achievement end. So the growth was the same in math as it was in 2019, but much higher in reading than in 2019. And domain 3 is where we compare how scholars performed in different demographic groups, as well as our special education and emerging bilingual scholars. So you'll see in that particular domain, our score was 80 this year, and it was 83 in 2019. But in this domain, you also see the impact of our math performance, which is the difference in our domain 3 score. Things to definitely celebrate. We had 5 A-rated campuses this year. We had 4 back in 2019, and we had fewer campuses back then. We had 25 B-rated schools, which I think is about 5 more schools than we did in 2019 that were rated B, 11 C-rated, and 2 schools that were not rated. This was the only year where you could receive not an R4 rating. That is because the state took into account the impact of the pandemic, and so no school across the state, if you're lower than a C, you would receive an R. So we did have 2 schools that were not rated. But super excited to see the schools that were A schools to kind of span the Metroplex there. Uplift Gratis Primary School, if you remember, anybody's been on the board, probably several years ago, that was one of our schools that we were really struggling to get to high levels of performance, and to see them to have an A through the pandemic is truly amazing. And so super excited to see that for Uplift Gratis. Uplift Crescendo, our brand new Fort Worth campus, is our first year ever testing. They started with an A, and that's like the strongest start I believe we've ever had for a primary campus. And so really proud of the leadership there. And then Uplift North Hills, all 3 campuses are A-rated. Again, so I know we had a year where the primary school was a B for 1 year, but now they're back to their A rating. So super proud of all those campus leaders and teams for their hard work. I've gone over many of the things from the start of the school year, but I do want to just stress that we held the early transition programming for our scholars in those transition grades. We just wanted to make sure they were ready for the first day of school, and wanted to see if that had any impact on them wanting to stay enrolled in our schools, but also just making the transition smooth into their new grade level and into their new school. I talked about the writing emphasis that we have currently in our schools. It's not just to improve STAR scores or DP assessment scores, but really to help scholars in their overall literacy and critical thinking, critical skill development. We think that can help them across the board. And I talked about the movement breaks that we've added. For improving the scholar experience, we just made sure that we were thinking about engaging activities. So over the course of the year and first semester, you should see many more of our schools having field trips and more fun experiences for kids to have during the school year. We had lost some of that during the pandemic because there weren't a lot of buses around, or they were crazy expensive. They are still crazy expensive. But we are trying to make sure our scholars still get those experiences because they enjoy those things as being students at Uplift. And so those are like, and I've gone over the other items for this one, so I won't repeat those things. But those are just some of the things that we've been really, really doubling down over the first couple of weeks. I'll go ahead and show you a couple quick slides so you can see the accountability numbers and see that like not much change in the domain scores, as I mentioned before, when comparing 2019 to 2022. So we've held, for the most part, with the exception of our achievement in math, we've kind of held performance from 2022, from pre-pandemic until now. Go to the next slide. I did want to show just a little bit about that domain for domain 1. So when you look at the blue table, you will see that our approaches number is less in 2022. Our approaches, meets, and masters numbers for overall achievement is less in 2022 than it was in 2019. But when you go down to the green table, which is the reading achievement, you'll see that we increased our reading achievement. The meets and masters are the bar for achievement. We increased our achievement in 2022 over 2019. And again, I just think that's excellent work on the part of our teams. But you will see the difference in achievement in our mathematics in that orange table, which is where you will see that overall difference in performance for achievement.
I'm sorry, I'm just having trouble understanding the percentages. They don't add down, so how do I think about the 76%?
Yeah, so I'll do the 76% 2019 column.
Okay.
And overall.
Yeah.
So 76% of the students hit approaches. Of that 76%, 46% of those have met expectations. Of the next one, the 46%.
20, yeah, got it.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful.
So I just wanted to pull out where you see the difference in the reading versus math performance impacting the overall score. You can go to the next slide. This is our comparison to other districts and high-performing charters and taxes. As you'll see, there were some districts that improved their performance, which is great. But you'll see most districts are rated a B and kind of hanging out in the same ballpark in terms of overall scores. And most of that is from the growth that school districts had from 2021 on STAR to 2022 on STAR. I think all of us would be very happy with higher levels of achievement in our schools. I think that's the next slide. So just a few next steps, there are 6 bullets. One is just meeting. I'm having a meeting with every single one of our academic directors to go over their accountability reports and to talk about how to set targets for their 2023 accountability. The main line in those conversations has been achievement, and I really walked through how do you make sure that you are setting appropriate targets for where your school is, and how do you increase achievement at your school so that we are a high-performing network for all students in our network. The second is that our campus leadership teams are just making adjustments. Now that they actually see their accountability reports, they've got to go back and retool some of their initial plans that they had, that they made over the summer, just to ensure that they have aligned their current strategies to their current areas of opportunity. We have to prepare our teachers for those shifts in STAR and end of course assessment taking place in the spring, so nothing is staying the same for our teachers this year. And so we just have been really intentional about developing a calendar of optional and required professional development around shifts in STAR and how to prepare your scholars for that assessment. Working with our high school leaders on college and career readiness, part of the calculation for domain 1, for all the domains actually, is around the levels of college readiness. And so really working with our 12th grade scholars to ensure that they have a college-ready ACT score or TSI score that meets the college-ready requirements. Going to continue with our coaching efforts. We've had some external support that helped us with literacy last year. We're adding support for mathematics this year. We found that has been really successful to get more deliberate and intentional coaching for campuses in need to really drive up the mathematics performance on the campus. And then we're also starting our high impact tutoring program for both primary and secondary. We really wanted to start like the first day of school, but obviously our third party vendors and things of that sort have to find people to work for them as well. And so we want them to take enough time to find really good people to tutor our students. And so we will be kicking off our tutoring programs starting as early as next week into the first couple of weeks into September. But that's far earlier than second semester last year. And so we're super excited about that. And now that the leaders have had time to retool some of their priorities, I think they can have a better idea of where to spend that high impact tutoring time with their scholars and teams. Any questions?
I have a question, and maybe you already addressed this, and I didn't catch it. Normally, the accountability report would come out annually, right? That gap was just because of COVID?
Yes.
There's no STAR testing.
Yeah, so there's no STAR testing in 2020. And then when we had STAR testing in 2021, we did not have accountability ratings.
Got it. So just to understand sort of what we're seeing, would it make sense to assume that the accountability scores would be higher since we're going to benchmark them from a year that didn't have that gap?
You mean would be higher now than next year?
So, yeah, if we're looking at next year's, what?
Yeah, so like now, I would say the accountability scores would probably be a bit higher because the 2021 scores are fairly low, across the state. And so this year, most school districts have tons of growth. And so you get points for growth in that second domain, and also in that third domain. And so I would expect that accountability scores are going to be pretty high right now.
Right.
Next year, we've got changes to the STAR assessment. There's another assessment for our emerging bilingual scholars, TELCAS, that's also changing. Our targets for the third domain, where we look at each different scholar group, demographic group, the federal targets are also changing next year.
Right, okay.
And one more thing, the state accountability is changing next year. So there's like tons of change happening, and
Right,
so
okay. I was just trying to understand
2023
the
is going to be
trajectory on-
an interesting thing, for us to try to predict in the
Got it.
spring where we will land.
If there were no changes in any of those accountability measures, right, if districts don't continue to aggressively grow kids, you actually would see I think you would see accountability come down.
Right.
Because you don't have the benefit of growth. Now it's an achievement game. And that's why these meetings Remy is having with each individual school leader are so valuable, because it's really helping them understand their numbers. And this is what you have to do on the achievement side to be able to maintain or improve your rating.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Other questions? Right. I have a couple. As you say, several different things in motion as we look to the next year, but are we potentially in a situation where just school districts all over the state could have a shocking drop because the growth was such a big factor in this year's numbers?
So one of the things that's on the table, the state has not finalized where they'll land on the new accountability system.
Okay.
One of the things on the table is changing how the growth calculation is done. So currently, for the second domain, you have the option for every kid who grows. If they grow not enough, they don't grow enough, you get 0 points for every kid. If they grow, they hit a certain target, kind of like an interim target, you'll get ½ a point. And if they meet the target, they get 1 point. That's really simple, and you can kind of figure that out in school district. Well, this upcoming year, they want to award more points for many different types of growth. So you potentially could be a student who had a very, 12th percentile, who did not meet state standards on STAR last year. Well, you take the STAR this year, and you still did not meet, but now you probably hit the 50th percentile, you'll probably get ½ a point for that growth. So we're going to add, you get from 0 to 3 points, just depending on where the student lands. So they're adding they're getting more points and more credit for students growing, on the continuum from does not meet to master. So it might wash out a little bit because there's just more opportunity for earning points. So it's probably not as drastic as a jump from I am a B this year, now I'm potentially not a D or an F. You might be a B this year and probably a C, because if you've grown at a similar rate, you might get more credit. You still may not have hit the level of achievement. But what I've been telling every school leader is that if you increase achievement, the growth takes care of itself.
Who cares about how those calculated?
And honestly, if the calculation is similar to the overall accountability score, if you have high levels of achievement, it impacts every single one of the domains. And so that's where I would spend my energy, is tracking where students are toward mastery, as opposed to playing a game of, did you grow a little bit or did you grow a lot?
My other question, I know we're all competitive here.
No, Remy and I are competitive.
Can you add a little bit of color to the comparison to Dallas, which looks even, and to the other, what we think of as leading charter networks in our state?
Yeah, honestly, it is about growth from where most districts got their points, including Dallas, is about their growth domain, the second domain. How we earned our rating in the second domain is actually our relative performance on achievement to other districts that have the same economically disadvantaged student group. That is the distinguisher between us. We're still high growth, we have just as much growth as everyone else, but Dallas typically doesn't have as much growth as they did last year, which kind of catapulted them up to their B is the same, but that's what helped them maintain their B. For us, how we stayed in the same ballpark was really our comparison to other districts that have the similar economic disadvantage. It's a subtlety, but really it's about growth. Last year, everyone had decent growth, so anything that you had in lower achievement, it was masked by the level of growth.
And then the comparison to IDEA, yes, and yeah.
Yeah, so I'll say yes performed actually pretty similarly.
When you look at per achievement.
Every single one of the things that, were pretty very similar. HIP, I believe theirs was about growth. IDEA actually, they had pretty high levels of achievement on their STAR assessments, and honestly, the reason why they're not an A is because they had 2 not rated schools. You cannot be an A district if you have any not rated schools in your portfolio. But their points would come out to, they have both achievement and growth at IDEA. Their points would come out to an overall A. So that would be the distinguisher between them and probably everyone else on that list, nobody else.
What schools are not rated schools and are we putting emphasis or attention?
Absolutely. The 2 schools are Uplift Mighty Middle School and Uplift Elevate Primary School. And yes, absolutely, we are putting a lot of emphasis and support on the leadership team. So a lot of those external coaching opportunities will be at those schools. Obviously, Mike could probably speak to a lot with the middle school as well around specific coaching plans and supports for those leaders at the middle school as well as the primary schools.
So I would say, I'm so sorry. I was just going to build really fast on the 2 NR schools. So Miami Middle School was close, right? When we did our internal calculations, we thought it was going to end up being a C, and then it ended up being an NR. We were disappointed we could get our heads around it. Elevate Primary School was a complete shock to us. And literally anyone on the executive team, if we were guess the second NR school, couldn't. And part of this that impacted Elevate Primary School was they did okay during the pandemic year. So when they had growth, they didn't have as much growth as other schools did. And also their relative comparison group, they are the second most affluent school in our network after North Hills. So their peer group they get compared to, because they're below 70%, is different than the rest of our schools except North Hills, who get compared to a group above 70%. So this also was really good for us because it helped, it gave us a very clear case example of why you have to understand the nuances of your accountability calculation and how these things work, because I don't think there's a person in our network who would say Elevate Primary School is the worst primary school in our network, but the way the calculations work, they're not rated. And so yes, of course, we're making sure they are not rated next year, but it really makes these meetings Remy's having super important of you need to understand the nuances of the calculations, because otherwise you can have a surprise. Elevate Primary School was not on our radar to be NR.
Just to give one quick example, both were very close. They were 2 points away from us. But the TELPAS examination for our emerging bilingual students, it's either yes or no, you get it. That number, that is 10 points you could earn. That 10 points could catapult a campus like Uplift County into the C category and help them with their overall score. So there were points, from it, I'm talking about kids as points, but there were opportunities for them to earn more points that I think that we have to be much more intentional about ensuring that every school is thinking about every single scholar and getting and meeting the expectations for the state.
Ricky and then Cameron. Maybe you had a question.
So this is a question more like, again, on the school level. So is there kind of a consensus around the competitor schools in that same area? So like, are we in line with what we're seeing from DISD down the street, so for those lower rated campuses, or are we subpar comparatively to our neighbors?
So we are literally just doing that analysis because the data just went public, 10 days ago?
20, I can't keep up with the dates, but it was maybe the 19th.
It's where we actually could get that level. So Deborah's actually already started it for Fort Worth of looking at it, exactly what you're saying, like my neighborhood school. We can bring that to the retreat because it's 45 schools and doing their peer set. And like I said, the data just became publicly available less than 2 weeks ago. So we're not there yet. But it's a very important question.
It's an important question and a complex question, just because of how I had to explain the difference in domain one. You almost got to look at that for every single school and say well, where exactly did you do well, or better than our schools? That's something that we would want, we want to know. It's just not as clean as in past years because the growth is so dynamic across the state.
I was just curious, is this data shared with teachers on a granular level? Given that we bring in thousands of new kids, so if I'm a fourth grade teacher in math, I get thousands of, a whole new classroom, I don't know what they performed before, so is there a number next to each kid, on roll, so I know this kid needs this kid's faster, this kid's approaching, or?
Yeah, so that's the best part about our data team and some of the dashboards that they have is that one, you can actually look at every single kid in your classroom and look at prior year performance on every assessment that we have. There's a dashboard that does that. There's also something that we have all schools do to prepare for to get the tutoring groups together. They have to look at the STAR performance and math performance, which are the beginning of their math testing. So they're able to look at their roster of kids in their classrooms performance over time. What you'll see many school leaders do in these conversations is they have that as well. They have broken down, have their own tracker outside of the dashboard, what every single student is doing. And so that is something that leaders and teachers have gotten really good at here in our network. I think it's just continuing to use that and monitoring throughout the year is super important to say, well, I had a kid who was at master's at the end of last year, but I'm looking at their interim assessment data and they're scoring at meets or approaches, what's happening is really where we want people spending more time this year to keep track of how scholars are progressing throughout the school year.
Other questions? Hearing none. Dr. Washington, thank you very much. Thorough presentation. Our next item is a governance item that I believe Yasmin is going to speak to.
So in June, you had an opportunity to vote on the ballot of the slate of all the officers and members of the executive committee. And we had extended an invitation for Ricky at that time to consider one of the at-large positions on the executive committee. And he was still making sure he understood his time commitments, especially with Charles Schwab moving into their new office space. So we asked, can you give me just a little bit more time? But we're really excited that he came back and said he would happily accept that additional time commitment. And so we are bringing back a just slightly delayed request to add Ricky to the board's executive committee in an at-large position. And so you all got his bio as well in your pre-read. And I don't know, Dawn, if you have anything to add, but Ricky's been an engaged member of the board in many ways and sits on a few committees, including governance and development, and was on school engagement. And I'm excited to have him grow in his leadership.
Just really, really happy to have him. We got a chance to spend time together at the dinner. And so I earmarked him then and planting little seeds along the way. So really happy that things worked out, and I think he'll be a great addition to the executive.
Thank you. This is an action item, so I'd like to ask whether there's a motion to approve the election of Ricky Garcia to the executive committee as an at-large member as presented. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Lael. Are there any votes against the motion? Hearing none, the motion is approved by unanimous vote. Congratulations, Ricky.
I just like to say, the invitation came before the gift, so there was no like, stop happening there.
Exactly, it just happened. Yes.
Ricky, thanks for all that you do.
No problem.
At this time, we're going to move to the executive committee portion of our meeting. Any non-executive committee member is welcome to stay, but because these remaining agenda items are administrative in nature rather than informational, you're welcome to head home if you'd like to.
But if you're on executive committee, you're staying, so grab us down.
We're here ready to go, so stick around. So, everyone heading out, thank you all very much.
Yes, you guys.
Kick off. Thank you, Adam.
I read.
Thank you, Harold.
I was reading it well. I was reading it.
Bye, Cheryl. Bye, thank you. Thank you. Bye, Christina.
Bye, Christina.
See you later.
Bye,
We right into it in the interest of time.
Yeah, let's roll.
Okay, gang.
Let's roll.
Next order of business.
It's gonna go to Alex.
Our next order of business is we're going to hand over to Alex.
Yep.
Alex, you ready to go?
Yes, sir.
Take it away, sir.
So I know we're transitioning into the executive committee meeting. We have a couple of action items to cover. The first we are going to take a look at is our annual special education policies and procedures. Again, this is an annual thing. We do this every single year as required by law. And we have Annette Enright here with us this afternoon. She is our Senior Director of Special Populations, and we're thrilled to have her. Annette, the floor is yours.
You ready for me?
Yes.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. As always, I give you a quick snapshot about our special pops numbers. And so we've grown a whole lot in the last 12 years, 16 years since I've been here, that's for sure. And so for Section 504, we have grown plus 240 scholars. So Section 504 is a general education program, and it's for scholars who may have disabilities. And so our campus directors work with our team to make sure that we set up plans for them if needed. And so we're up to 741 Section 504 scholars served through Section 504. For special education, we are up an additional 200 scholars, so that puts us at 2,059 at Summer Snapshot. That's really the trend that we have is about 200 to 250 additional SPED scholars every year. And so I've kind of outlined specific disabilities. So we have 380 scholars with autism who may be served in a general education setting or in the SPED setting. We have 148 scholars who have an intellectual disability. You'll see our speech numbers are very high, so we provide a lot of speech therapy to our kiddos. And we have about 342, that number keeps rising depending on our committee meetings. Scholars in a self-contained setting, so those are scholars who are in our classroom for 60% of the time. And then we have 10 homebound scholars. That number rose by 3, which is a small amount, but specifically around COVID, because of our medically fragile kiddos, our parents opted into virtual homebound. And so right now, we're currently serving 10 scholars in that homebound setting. Before we move on, any questions that I can take about our population or how our team serves those scholars?
Can I just ask a question about how that fits into your, when we were talking about our kids and how they've grown? I mean, do they take the STAR? Do they have an equivalent STAR test? Do we know if those children, how they're doing and how they're being tracked?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So yes, our special education scholars do take STAR.
Okay.
The decision on which type of STAR test they take is made by the R committee, so admission, review, and dismissal committee. So our kiddos who are served in our self-contained setting typically take what we call STAR Alt. It is more of a hands-on test where our team sits. They have a 2-week window, and our team sits with each scholar individually, and they ask them to do things such as sort, colors, shapes, depending on their grade level. And so START Alt is given from 3rd through 8th grade, and then we have START Alt EOC, which is for our high school scholars. Yeah. And so in terms of achievement, before I go there, our other scholars who are not served in a self-contained setting, or who our committee has decided they would take regular STAR, do take the normal STAR test with accommodations typically. So that could look like small group testing, individual administration, small group oral, so a teacher would actually read the test to them, that's appropriate. But they do take the regular STAR test. And so our focus this year, my team's focus is typically compliance, making sure we're compliant with state and federal guidelines. Academic side, we have a special education instructional team. We all know compliance and instruction work hand in hand, right, Remy? And so we work really closely together to make sure that we are aligned on our focus in developing IEPs, but also implementing the IEPs. And so our focus this year is for additional supports and training for our teachers related to scholars in a resource setting. So those are scholars who may have a modified curriculum, and then scholars in an inclusion setting, which are scholars that are in the general ed classroom, but may have a SPED staff member come in and support them. So we're really focusing on the kiddos who will take the regular STAR and how we can better train our teachers and our staff to support them and meet them where their needs are. Yeah, go ahead.
For 2022, for our SPED scholars who took STAR or STAR Alt, it helped me us met our federal target in reading across the board, but not in math. And so their performance is very similar to the general population for this past year. On STAR.
Questions? Zenra, thank you so much for your presentation and for the vital work that you do.
One more. Sorry,
One more slide. So I have, you've seen the pre-read, our 150-page document of
I did not send the 150
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Because they will never invite me back.
Yeah. But we do have printed copies of just the 20 pages where there's, so Carrie, do you mind just passing those out, please? And that way, and then if you want to grab one, you can just point them where there was no reason for y'all to read 150 pages of SPED policy, especially when these are pretty nuanced minor changes. So Annette's literally going to point to you like, we had to change out the word auditory impairment for this, and it's in every one of these 20 pages, just so you can see it's been updated, but without having to try to navigate it on your own.
Yes.
So.
Thank you, Cancer. And thank you, Carrie. You're welcome. So every year, SPED policies and procedures have to be approved by the board in order for us to upload to what we call the legal framework. And so we made minor changes to the SPED policies this school year. The first is related to our READ process. So a READ is a review of existing evaluation data, and that's specific to our initial evaluation. So that's for scholars who may be referred initially to special education. In previous years, our special education evaluation team conducted a review of evaluation data, which delayed the process for an initial evaluation. We've gotten an influx of initial referrals due to COVID and learning loss. And so our team got together, looked at the procedures, looked at the law, and decided that a READ wasn't necessarily needed for an initial evaluation, but will be conducted as appropriate. And so that's the only change to the policy, is to add the words as appropriate.
And you can see, just to, guide you all to everyone, you guys know what you're voting on. If you go to the second page, it says page 33 at the bottom. You can see review of existing evaluation data, and you can see that list of that typical type of evaluation data. So all I'm saying is literally the only change here of all this policy you see is that now this doesn't have to hold up an initial evaluation. It can be as appropriate. That's literally like in these first 2 pages, front and back in blue, are this first item on evaluation procedures, where it's literally just saying now the read is as appropriate. That's literally what the change is.
Yes, that's correct.
Are we, so in the document it says if appropriate, not as appropriate. I don't know if that matters as far as like what we're voting on.
It doesn't,
Right.
I mean, I'll let Alex speak to that.
Is the question
If
whether it's
versus
as,
as.
Yeah.
We're voting on what's in the policy.
Okay.
Our summary
Yeah.
slide says as, but is there a difference between if and as?
But no, I mean, I think it's just, I would take it as synonymous.
Okay.
I think really there.
Any other questions about the evaluation policy? The next policy change is related to timeouts and the definition. It's not the actual definition. The actual definition has always been in our policy.
Oops, sorry, here we go.
That's-
Yes, she's still on that line.
Oh, sorry. That's okay. The next
Oh,
one.
wait, one more.
There we
Yeah,
go.
there we go.
Yeah, okay. The only thing we're adding to the policy is that if timeout is a behavior intervention strategy that a classroom teacher is utilizing to support our scholars in special education, that we must document it and include it as part of the IEP or the BIP, which is the behavior intervention plan. So we don't want our staff to be using timeout as a behavior intervention strategy. We're really focused on more positive behavior intervention strategies. And so if that's an opportunity, if there's an opportunity for us to use it, or if it's something that our licensed specialist in school psychology recommends, we would include that in the IEP or the BIP, the behavior intervention plan.
So again, the next 4 pages that you have that start at 97 and go through 103, you can see timeout is mentioned in item number 4 on page 97, and again on the back side on 98, use of timeout. So again, timeout is, as Annette said, just to be noted as a strategy if it's identified as part of the BIP.
That's a really dumb question. So they felt the need to speak to literally
I know.
locking children into a so-called locked box.
Yeah.
Literally, the seclusion policy is deeply disturbing. We do not do seclusion, but we have to, like, it's literally part of the Texas Education Code,
Alright.
so we have to copy it over.
Yeah,
You now understand why there's a ton of compliance around SPED because of what was done in the 60s and 70s.
Exactly, exactly.
Yes.
Okay. And then the last is just related to more respectful terminology for our deaf community. So previously, qualifying disability for someone who may have been deaf was called an auditory impairment. Senate Bill 281 asked that we use more respectful terminology, and so the state has changed that to deaf or hard of hearing. And so that is throughout our entire 150-page policy and procedure document. And so I did print out, and you'll see on page 50, eligibility criteria, where we did change in our policy the wording or terminology related to the deaf community.
Yeah, so all the rest of the pages you have are just showing you how it has been swapped. But again, any change we make, we need to make sure we're all approved. Yes.
Wasn't the term deafness like used many years ago, and then they realized that, then they changed it to hearing impaired?
Yes.
And now we're back to deaf.
Yeah, that's correct. It was previously deafness, and then hearing impaired for about 15, 20 years, and then most recently they changed it to deaf or hearing. I'm sorry, hard of hearing.
We are really done with this.
Okay, I jumped the
subject.
gun last time, but I will say once again,
That's my fault, sorry.
thank you, Ms. Enright,
No, thank
for the great
you.
work that you do.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me, everyone.
So, do we have a motion to approve the annual special education policies and procedures as presented?
So moved.
Thank you, Cameron. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Don. Were there any votes against the motion? Hearing none, the motion is approved by unanimous vote. Next item.
Great. Thank you so much, Annette. Moving on to Lisa Schmidt. We have our annual board meeting to approve our Scholar Code of Conduct. Lisa is our Senior Director of Wellbeing, and she's over everything Code of Conduct-wise. So Lisa, I will hand it to you.
It's really great to be here. The code of conduct, there are no significant changes from last year to this year, except we fixed the typos, and we changed the dates. So it looks really great. It's exactly the same. It basically is just a descriptor of the 3 different tiers of behaviors, infractions, and it lists our interventions, our references for disciplinary action. It's distributed out to scholars and families. It's an appendix to the scholar handbook. So most of our scholars and our families are seeing it through the scholar handbook as an appendix inside of that. But the exciting news is that we have assembled an advisory committee of teachers, school leaders, CMO directors to look at a reimagining of our code of conduct so that it can be much more focused on restorative practices. I was really lucky to have Dr. Melville come and visit one of our first meetings about that. And so as we move forward looking into restorative practices, moving away from punitive and more into accountability and consequences that align much better with our baccalaureate, our profiles. And also, this is a movement to really examine racial equity in all of our work that we do with discipline. We know that the best way to do that is to go towards restorative practices. So we're going to spend a year doing that. We started off by running 20 different focus groups with scholars, parents, teachers, and school leaders to find out what they thought about the current code, what they feel is missing, what their opinions are about our discipline processes, and we got really fantastic information. And so the goal is by next summer, approximately May, we'll have a pretty good looking document to share to say this is what we're proposing as we move forward. We'll have many, many iterations of that, which will be going forth in front of our advisory committee all along the way. So for this year, no changes. But for next year, hopefully we have a really fantastic code of conduct, and it will be called a code of character and conduct as we go forward.
Could you say a little bit about what was learned from the 20 focus groups?
Oh, yes, I can. Yeah, sure. So I would say overall, our scholars feel that our disciplinary practices are very fair. So we did kids that, scholars that have been having problems, scholars that are athletes, scholars that are very high achieving, and across the board, there's a sense that they are very well respected by their teachers and that the disciplinary practices are fair. And that really made me feel great to hear that. We learned that the largest problem that everyone cites, which are all stakeholders groups, are dress code and tardies. There seems to be a cloud of misunderstanding around dress code and tardies, and that's actually addressed in the scholar handbook, not in the code of conduct. And so I've been working with Mike Carbone here as we begin to kind of clarify and look at those. The reason that it hits code of conduct is because if you are in a dress code repeatedly, that turns into a tier 1 behavioral issue. If you are frequently tardy, that again, or absence, those turn into tier 1s. So there is a crossover there. But those were the biggest issues. I think that for teachers, they would, what they're looking for is when they make an office referral and a scholar is sent to the office, then what happens? So I think that's really easy in clarifying that communication back and forth so that the teachers know what are the consequences that are being applied and how can that scholar be held accountable for them. And that really is restorative practices. It's much more about accountability and consequences. So I'm excited as we move forward and untangle our way through dress code.
First of all, thank you for the invitation and being able to be a part of that. We have seen, I've seen my share of behavioral issues come through over time. and I was very interested to see the work that you were doing. And I want to applaud you for the collaborative approach. That's a big effort to include so many people at so many different levels to get a really broad stroke, a big breadth of. And you and your team have really done that. So it was very inclusive, it was very engaging, and I am very appreciative and looking forward to seeing the fine work that you're already doing.
Well, I invite anyone to join our advisory committee if you're so allowed because we're happy to have lots of different points of view and stakeholders as we do this. I think we have to have, a collective agreement about how it's done. So as an open invitation.
And we'll bring Lisa back for updates to the board, right?
Yes.
Like, this was an executive committee because literally there's like spell,
Right.
corrections on it. But we'll bring her for the entire board as we continue on this journey. We're too early right now to do that.
Should we go on?
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Smith.
Mhm.
Work you do. Do I have a motion to approve the 2022 to 2023 Scholar Code of Conduct as presented?
So moved.
Thank you. Second? Second. Thank you. Are there any votes against the motion? Hearing none, the motion is approved by unanimous vote. Thank you. Next item, Ann.
Sure, I don't have any additional slide, but we are asking for your approval to make a modification to our current teacher qualification policy. We currently require all of our teachers to have certification. We would like to add language that allows the CEO or her designee to make changes to the requirements at any point in time to allow us a bit more flexibility as we continue managing the teacher shortage. At this point in time, this level of detail is not in the policy, but just so you are aware, the one group that we are planning and hoping to take action on is our Spanish teachers. That is a role that continues to be very hard to fill, and there are some pretty significant challenges with teachers acquiring certification due to the tests that they have to pass in order to get their certification in the state of Texas. So that is one area that is lower stakes. It's an elective course. It's hard to fill, that we believe this change could help us be a bit more nimble in how we set those requirements to ensure that we have people that know the language, but also are not blocked from coming and teaching because of our certification policy.
We have a pretty high bar for certification today, and we know that we have peers like IDEA who, I don't even know it could be 30% of their teachers who are not certified across the spectrum, and they just lean in on professional development. We are not at that place yet where we want to drop that, and so again, to Ann's point, we're starting with Spanish. If there becomes like other electives where we think it's important, like technology or theater, then I'll come back and share those. But right now, it's Spanish, and there's not an intention to lower the standard for any core content class.
Is there an internal process that guides them or qualifications they have to have?
Yeah.
Yes.
For certification prep.
Yeah.
For Spanish?
For Spanish.
Yes. So if you approve this, then we will be going forward with operationalizing it for the first time. But Remy and I have been working together to come up with qualifications in regards to course hours that they have taken, if they have studied, ways that we can assess proficiency live in the interview process. And then also there will be a number of professional development courses that they are required to take that are through the TEA, Region 10, as well as through the IB program. So it's not just absolving those teachers from going through any kind of litmus tests on the front end, or work to ensure that they have some training to be prepared to actually teach the language. But that's what we have. That's what we've come up with so far.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I see clarification.
John.
Oh, John.
Yeah, I'm in favor of the motion, but I had one clarification. In the pre-read, it led to me, let me ask this question, is this open-ended in terms of time, or are we giving this waiver for this school year?
Yeah.
I didn't see it back in time on it.
So, I think I would say generally what the policy revision allows is, it it is one, it's open-ended, to allow for, Yasmin CEO, or her designee to kind of make a decision based on need, whether or not we need to have a waiver to a certification/licensure, requirement. And the purpose for leaving it more open-ended was we wouldn't have to necessarily bring it back to the board every single time because of the status kind of we are in with hiring, right now, it will stay the same. As we noted on the slide, we're seeing such an issue statewide. The TEA is loosening the certification requirements for traditional ISDs.
Yeah.
And we see them going through waivers, so.
I understand the need.
Yeah.
Would it inconvenience you if it was for this school year?
I think we just have to decide, right, because the hiring starts for next school year in January or February. So maybe what might, right?
Well, I've been for hiring decisions made over the next year, but.
For 2 years, right, to fix
2
this
years,
problem, 2 years.
Yeah, I think like 2 years would make sense.
That'd be
So we
fine.
could, right.
It's a minor governance
Yes.
item, but.
No, I think that's fine. I think that's
This
fine.
feels weird to approve it as an open-ended change.
I think it'd be fine. I think 2 years feels like a longer time frame for us to get through this season and into next and actually.
I know we'll naturally revisit it at some point in
Yes,
time, but.
yes.
I feel better if it said.
Yeah, and I had the same concern, it's like, okay, because
Yeah.
what happens is this could slip away from us.
Yep.
We never see it again, and
I don't
before we
have
know
any
it,
issue
we're,
with that.
we're in the low percentages, as opposed to having it come back again, all right, what did we do with this policy change? Maybe we keep
Yeah.
attention in line.
Maybe we say October of 2024 because that gets us, because we always know we're hiring into that next school year.
I just think that's.
Do you need signatures on it right
So the-
now? No.
so
We
the
don't need
clarification-
signatures, so it's easy for us and we can send it back out to everybody.
And the clarification I wanted to ask, so that, and do I understand correctly that the policy change about our CEO or a designee to waive any teaching certification in your discretion,
Yep.
but your intention is to waive it with respect to Spanish teachers?
Yes,
Okay.
and I'm happy to bring back at all of our board meetings, okay, we now think we need to waive it for X position. And if we want to add something like that in, pre-approval, that's fine. Or I can just give updates on it, but right now, we're super transparent about it. Right now, we're just trying to get Spanish teachers, because otherwise what happens with Spanish is you have a substitute who only speaks English, and the kids are online, and then we get parent feedback of this is not helpful, my child is not learning language.
Is there anyone who would want that pre-approval? It's not.
I don't think we need pre-approval, I just like John's idea.
I wouldn't have thought so.
Push it out 2 years, just so that we can see what happens with it.
Okay, so the 2 year, but no pre-approval.
Yeah,
And next year, come back and push it out another 2 years, as long as we can kind of get a.
well, and if it's
report back
working,
of what-
right?
That's
And
it.
if it's working.
Yeah, right.
See what Tuesday is.
Great.
Any other thoughts or questions on this one?
So when you ask for the motion, just including this change,
Yes.
and then we'll resend
Okay,
it.
so
And I'd be interested in just updates as we go, if it expands beyond Spanish, I'd be interested too.
Yeah,
Just kind of,
perfect.
yeah. So, do I have a motion to approve the updated teacher qualification board policy as presented, but with the one change that it would apply through
October 2024.
October 2024? Any such motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Second?
Second?
Thank you, Lyle. Are there any votes against the motion? Hearing none, the motion is approved by unanimous vote. Alex?
Thanks, Colin. We are actually going to move past the next item. This item, we are still in the process of reviewing and reviewing with TEA and doing some internal work. We have all year to do it, so there's no time crunch on it.
Great, so we're gonna now move into closed session for just a brief update on uplifting the secondary. We'll be
Good.
super fast.
The board will now move into closed session pursuant to sections 551.071 and 551.072 of the Texas Government Code to conduct a private consultation with its attorney and deliberate the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real property. The time is now 6:07 and we are in closed session. We are now leaving closed session. The board is now back in open session. The time is 6:16 and I note here the same quorum of the board is present. I also note that the board did not take any action or vote during closed session. Are there any other things anyone wants to bring before the board? Okay. There being no further business before the board, this meeting is adjourned. The time is now 6:16.